Today's guest is Jenny Bales, a leader and consultant in the Catholic homeschooling movement, here to share some practical tips on how to get started homeschooling.
Welcome to Homeschooling Saints, the podcast that helps you create the homeschool you love for the people you love. Our host is Lisa Mladinich, a Catholic life coach, TV host, best-selling author, and an instructor at Homeschool Connections.
Before we get started, remember to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, click the bell to join our channel. Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Lisa Mladinich, and today homeschool consultant Jenny Bales is back with us to talk about how to get started homeschooling. Jenny is a Catholic homeschooling mom who is passionate about connecting and supporting fellow Catholic homeschooling moms, both through her online ministry and in her local community. Her 4 incredibly unique kids, currently aged 11 to 22, have been or were homeschooled all of their lives. Her oldest 2 students have graduated and are thriving in the colleges they chose. Jenny loves sharing the beauty of integrating our Catholic faith with our homeschooling adventures and believes that every moment of homeschooling is a treasured opportunity to reach the hearts of our children for Christ. A few of her favorite things are Eucharistic adoration, chai lattes, sweet tea, dark chocolate, red wine, college football, and mystery novels. And now everyone wants to be your best friend, Jenny. Before having kids, she taught secondary English language arts and worked in Catholic youth ministry. Now Jenny's Heart of a Mother online community has grown to over 6,100 Catholic homeschooling moms from around the world. You can find Jenny and all of her resources at heartofamother.net, just the way it sounds, heartofamother.net, including the opportunity to chat one-on-one with a homeschooling consultant. Welcome back to the show, Jenny. It's great to see you.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be with you, Lisa.
Oh, thanks. So just start us off. Just give us some context. How long have you been homeschooling? Give us a little bit of a snapshot.
Okay, so we are about to start our 18th year of homeschooling here in our family. And so it's been a long journey. My oldest 2 were homeschooled K through 12, and they graduated and got into the colleges they wanted and are doing great. And then I have 2 still at home who are entering 6th and 8th grade, respectively. So I still have years to go in this journey, but it's been fun, and it's taught me so much.
Yeah, and I love that God has shown you lots of places where you're able to lead and encourage others. You're still in the trenches, you're still working it out, but you've learned a lot in that time. So how would what process would you advise anyone about to start homeschooling or kind of at the starting gate? What do you recommend we do?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different perspectives for this and a lot of different ways to get started. So there's not just one way to decide what to do, but I definitely learned some things the hard way in my own journey. And so I love to just share where to start and how to keep going. And so that has to start with prayer. If you have decided to homeschool, hopefully you've been doing that with prayer, discerning that with the Lord and your family. But if you've made that decision and you're like, okay, now what do I do? Keep praying. Don't ever stop. The Lord needs to hear from us. He wants to hear all those little intricate details of our daily lives. And I think of him throughout my whole journey as this constant companion that has really helped me to make this work. And he can do that for you too. So always, always, always begin with prayer and keep going and find ways to snatch moments throughout your days. Obviously, we're busy moms. It's not going to be like, I can spend 3 hours in prayer, but snatch those moments, because I think that is the most important place to begin.
Yeah, and it really is a powerful spiritual principle that when we give our time to God, when we actually humble ourselves to be in that place of need and draw to him for everything, that boy, does he respond in generosity. So this is not just check the box. This is a lifestyle.
Yes. Yes, just like homeschooling's a lifestyle, right? And I think that's one of the hardest lessons I had to learn because I was a school teacher, that homeschooling is this totally different animal. It just operates differently. And when we lean into that, we find more joy. So it is kind of a different process to get started. You're not just signing your kid up for a school, although you can sign your kid up for, a program that's homeschooling that's related. But as parents, especially I speak to moms mostly, we have to, I think there's some heart work and some mind work that we should do before we just make that decision, right? So I have 5 steps that I'm always telling mamas, this is where you need to go. These are the steps you need to identify or go through to get started, to really have a great first year. The first is to figure out your why, then to look at the legal requirements, then to make connections, which is super important with other homeschoolers. Do your research. Notice that's step 4, not step 1. Do the research after you've taken these other steps, and then choose your materials, whether that is a program or you're buying materials or you're, choosing a hybrid or some kind of co-op. All those things are included there. So just kind of going through those steps of putting the foundation in first and then the nitty-gritty towards the end, I think is really a helpful way to go about it.
Yeah, I love that. So let's take them one by one, Jenny, and expand on each of those for us.
Absolutely. So like I said, I save the research towards the end, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But the first thing I recommend is to identify, why are you homeschooling? Figure out, hopefully you're already discerning that, of course, when you made your decision to homeschool, but why am I doing this? What are the reasons? Spouses can sit down together and kind of brainstorm, but write that out. What are the real reasons you're homeschooling? And that helps you to identify your priorities and goals. And then later, when you're making decisions about materials and programs, then you will make better decisions by being able to look back at, why am I doing this? What is the whole purpose here? What is the whole goal? Because it's really easy to get distracted, right? Overwhelmed by so many options in the homeschooling world right now, which is great. But to have that key component down first, why do I homeschool? And I write that down and I keep that in my planning binder. And I look at that every so often throughout my journey. And it changes, right? Why we start homeschooling can be different than why we keep homeschooling. But I always kind of start there when I'm planning a new year, because that helps me make better decisions. So that's the first thing is,
I love that.
Why are you homeschooling?
Yeah. And that helps you and your spouse, or those of you who are homeschooling alone, to have a vision. It becomes that lens, as you said, for making really good choices. And I love that you started with that.
Yeah. And every family is so different, right? We all have different kids, different experiences, different goals, and that's great. And all of those things lead us to homeschooling. So our reasons are going to look differently. And that helps us stay in our lane, so to speak, as well, and not compare too much with what other families are doing, because our reasons might be different than, that lady at church that we know, or me on the internet, right? And so knowing what your family prioritizes is super helpful.
Wonderful.
And then we got to do the boring stuff. So number 2 is to look up the legal requirements for homeschooling in your state. If you're in the United States, it is different in every single state. And I think it's really important for families to be aware of what all of those requirements are, so you can discern how best to honor them. And you've got to figure out what they are and look that up. There's a lot of misinformation on the internet right now, though. I'm looking up laws in different states to help clients, and there's wrong information. So there's 2 places that I can recommend to look, because you want to know what they are. One is HSLDA does tend to have very thorough explanations. A couple people have found a couple mistakes there. So always also ask your local people, either your state organization or just fellow homeschoolers who are really on top of things, not the ones who, just do whatever they want whenever they want and don't pay attention to those things.
And we're not talking about the school district here. No. We have our .gov site for the New York State that says what kinds of curriculum we have to do in order for our children to graduate ultimately. Right. So obviously we're starting there, but then do you mind just kind of thumbnailing a little bit of what you might find there?
Absolutely. So I know that how it's written is in various states is different. And so some states write very, very specifically. And I think there's now 5 states that are really, really, really specific. New York is one of them where you are. I'm on the other end of the spectrum in Texas, where it's so vague that the interpretation is like, what does this mean? Which is good and bad, right? I mean, it's helpful because then you can do what works, but also it's like, but I don't want to get it wrong. So always reaching out to some kind of a state organization, whether that's a government entity, or specifically, I also recommend a homeschooling entity and homeschooling families who are living it, because living what's on paper in the legality of it sometimes looks slightly different, and especially where there's room for interpretation, there's a lot of ways to do things. And I feel like even in those really restrictive states, there is room for interpretation. And so hearing from different perspectives can help you figure that out and help you find your way, which is why I always say, look to the legal places, the national place, your state website, but also get your local perspectives so that you kind of know what is it that's being required of me, and how then you can discern as a family how to proceed, right?
Yes. Good. Yeah. I love that. Yeah, I remember starting out and being a little overwhelmed by it, but you're absolutely right. The people who are living it have it down to just good habits and frameworks that they operate within, and then they have a lot of freedom once they know what the guardrails are.
Right. And as an example, just a real specific example, I had someone ask me about the homeschool laws in their state, and their state, I can't remember which one it was off the top of my head, said the teacher has to have a certain number of college hours to be able to homeschool. And I was like, well, hold on. The parent was panicking. Does that mean I can't homeschool? I never went to college. No, that means that you have to follow this other option within the law where you have a supervising teacher who helps you make sure you fulfill those obligations. So it was, sometimes you can just read it and kind of freak out and be like, I can't do that. But you always want to hear the interpretation. The legalese is meant to be complicated. But boiling it down, like you said, to personal experience can really help. Really can.
That's so good. And it's so reassuring in being in that relational space with somebody who's doing just fine with it all. And they can be, homeschool moms are the best. They're so reassuring.
They really are, which is, and not to jump ahead, but that's why number 3 on my list is making connections with other homeschoolers. And that's part of this, is once you've looked the things up, then you have to talk to the real people, right? I think you just basically said what I would say is that making connections with other homeschoolers brings us confidence, because we can see how it happens. We know we're completely normal for worrying about this or for this not going right. It gives us so much peace to just know, oh, this is normal. This is typical, or this is, normal is such an awful word, but other people have experienced this, right? Other people are walking this walk. And so when we make connections with other homeschoolers, and I know with homeschooling, that's challenging when you live in an area that might not have other homeschoolers or might not have other Catholic homeschoolers, because obviously the top choice would be, find a Catholic homeschooling community that you can connect with to build your faith, build those relationships. But sometimes it's not there. You can look online. There are options. It's not as good. I agree. Face-to-face is better, but somehow find connections where you can understand how other families do this. As I said at the beginning, like for me, the journey to realize this is different than my classroom teaching was really profound. And most of us weren't homeschooled, right? Because just by statistically. And so our experience was a brick and mortar school, and that's what we know. But seeing homeschooling happening is super, super enlightening, and just really can bring a lot of confidence to the mama who's not sure what to do and not sure how to do it, or to the dad who, I hear a lot of dads are really concerned about, is my kid going to be on track? Is my kid going to be able to graduate, get to college, and all the things that need done, right? Because dads are really good about the long-term big picture, and they get concerned about those things. But then I see them talk to other homeschool dads who have done this, and their confidence is renewed, and they're like, oh, okay, this is possible. So that's why connections is number 3, because it's super, super important.
Wow, I love that so much. And there's something very sacramental and very Catholic about being incarnating our desires and plans, and being in that relational space that our Lord is always inviting us into, but to be that for each other, to be the body of Christ for each other. And as you said, it doesn't necessarily have to be the ideal situation for you to draw wisdom and goodness. And doesn't it just always bless the other person too when we ask them to share about their journey, to share their wisdom?
Absolutely. I experience that all the time because I get asked a lot of questions in my, in Heart of a Mother. And it's so great to remember the answers and to be like, oh yeah, that's why I do that. Or, oh yeah, that was a good decision. Maybe I should try that again, because I'm constantly learning and growing as well. And that's a beautiful, beautiful thing to have happen. And I want to clarify too, like you said, it doesn't have to be the ideal situation. And quite frankly, I think some of us will be like, well, that means I have to join a co-op or a program or, local something. You don't have to. Most of my homeschooling journey, we've not been a part of a co-op or anything like that. We've homeschooled on our own, but we intentionally make connections and build community with other homeschoolers here and there because co-ops have not worked for my family. It's just not a good fit. And so there's lots of opportunities for coming together and just understanding this journey we're on because we're on the same journey, and you can have your non-Catholic friends, you can have your non-homeschooling friends as well, but they don't understand the day-to-day as much. And so it's very comforting to connect with other Catholic homeschoolers.
Yeah. And it definitely creates an environment for your kids to feel like they're a part of something and not missing out. So good. Yeah. So we just have to take a quick sponsor break to hear from our good friends, Homeschool Connections, and we will be right back with Jenny Bales. We're talking about how to get started homeschooling, and we're having a lot of fun. Don't go away.
Hi, I'm Walter Crawford.
And I'm Maureen Whitman.
We are the co-founders of homeschoolconnections.com and proud sponsors of the Homeschooling Saints podcast,
which is here to help you homeschool more joyfully, more easily, and more effectively.
We want to thank you for listening.
And we invite you to check out our courses at homeschoolconnections.com.
And now, back to our program.
Okay, we're back with Jenny Bales, and we're talking about how to get started homeschooling. This is so good. Thank you so much, Jenny. Just let's move to the next part.
Definitely. Right. So we covered the first three steps kind of what I recommend in getting started homeschooling. First is to identify why you're homeschooling. Write down what that is. Why did you decide to homeschool? Why are you homeschooling right now? And the second is to look up the legal requirements in your state or country or wherever you are and try to understand those with various resources. And then thirdly is to make connections with other ideally Catholic homeschoolers, either in person or online, so that you can have that gauge. But I want to reiterate what I said at the beginning. We always begin with prayer because God needs to be a part of this, and he needs to be a part of every step too. So when you're just discerning why you're homeschooling, when you're looking up the legal requirements and figuring out how do I do this, when that stresses you out, especially, trust the Lord, let him guide you, making connections with other homeschoolers especially when it's really difficult. I've been in, areas, we've moved a lot, that it's hard to make friends. It's hard to find the right people, and just praying for the Lord to send the right people and praying for doors to open. So, don't underestimate that he wants to know all those little details that we're concerned about, and he wants to help us make all those decisions along the way, because he really does.
Yeah, amen. Yeah. So what's step 4? I'm excited.
So step four is the one we all do and we all know, is to research all the things, right? And most homeschoolers who've decided to homeschool have already been doing some research, hopefully, because you need to know what you're deciding to do before jumping in. But to really take your research to the step of, okay, what else do I need to know? And what else do I want to know about homeschooling to help me get started? This could be really, really fun because there's so much to look at and there's so many different perspectives and different resources out there, but it also can be really overwhelming. And I know that. So I always recommend, limit your time for your research. Obviously, you could just endlessly research all the things and learn more and more and more and more and more. But at some point, there has to be a stopping so you can make decisions. And then we don't get trapped in not having a plan and not being able to move forward in that kind of deer in headlights indecision situation. So research the philosophies so you're familiar with them. Research the curricula so you're familiar with it all. Research, schedules and how different people do their days. Schoolrooms, if you like the pretty, Pinterest ready areas, if that's your style. Research all the things, because as you do that, you'll start to see more and more what your homeschooling style will be. And as I said, every family is so unique. God made us so individual. that your style is going to be different than anybody else in the world. And but you can pull from those resources that you find as you do all that research. And you usually online, of course, is where you're going to find the most information. But also don't underestimate researching in your own community and talking to other homeschoolers about what they do in their homes and outside of their homes, right? Because you can find out about some really cool opportunities that way. So that's number 4, do all the research and don't get overwhelmed. Just like set yourself okay, I'm going to let myself research for the next week or 2, and then I'm going to start to make decisions.
Yeah. So good. Yeah. And you're right. We can get in the weeds with it. It can help to, like you just said, to set a little bit of a deadline. And as you said again and again, and this is so important, just to have conversations about it. Mm-hmm. Really good.
Definitely. Because you need to process all that information too, that you're collecting, right? And be weighing, is this something that would work for my family or not? Because not all of it's going to work for your family. You have to pick out the things that your mama heart. I always talk to the mamas. Your instinct and your mother's instinct is really, really good. It's God-given. So trust your own intuition to know what could work and what might not work.
Yeah. And I will just add that when we first started, I had to start suddenly because I'd been trying to get my husband to agree for a long time. And then he suddenly agreed. And I had to scramble because school was starting and I had to notify the school district and all those things. But then about halfway through that first, what I would call a semester, we made a big change just because of talking to other homeschoolers and seeing what would work better for our daughter. So, so that's, I would just say with the attitude that you'll probably be pivoting from time to time. And that's okay. That's normal. Again, I'll use that word.
Yes, I know. Well, I mean, I know we shouldn't really compare ourselves, like I said, to a brick and mortar classroom, but they pivot as well, right? Those teachers, sure, they make their lesson plans or their given curriculum, but each semester, each year, each term, like they make changes just like we do to meet the needs of their students. Sometimes there are arbitrary changes as well that the school implements, right? And so that's fine. We're going to change. It's going to ebb and flow. It's not going to be whatever decisions we make right now are not going to be like set in stone forever and ever, which is another good thing to mention is that, if you've decided to homeschool right now and you're going to do this, you're deciding for this year, right? We decide one year at a time. And there's nothing saying even within that year, if it's complete crisis mode, you might change your mind. It's okay to change your mind. Your kids will be fine, whether it's in the middle of that year or after a year, or then after the first year, you discern, is this the right time to continue homeschooling for our family right now? Mm-hmm. And, discern that. And eventually the discernment gets easier and it doesn't seem as monumental because you've been doing it a while if you do continue. But it is a year to year. So don't panic that things are going to be set in stone forever and your kids are going to be ruined in 1 year, because it can't happen.
Wonderful. Thanks for taking that pressure off, because we can guilt ourselves, and again, having those conversations will help with that too. All right, good. So what's step number 5?
So that is step number 5, is to make those decisions and choose those materials that you're going to use to homeschool your kids, right? Okay. And we always make that big, we have that big like curriculum. What curriculum should I use? And many, many families start with that step. That's not my first step. That is, in my experience, that's not the first thing you need to figure out. It's the last thing you need to figure out. And so looking at what curricula is out there, what, resources are in your local community as far as lessons and classes and extracurriculars, all those I kind of categorize into this decision-making of what materials am I going to use. Most people who know Heart of a Mother find me through the Mega Catholic Homeschooling Curriculum List, which I should have mentioned to you earlier, but it's heartofamother.net/curriculum. And it is all of the Catholic homeschooling curricula that is out there. And it's a good place to start. If you're not sure where to start, it's a good place to start and look at those options and see, how are they different? Which styles seem to fit what I need, and which resources within each curriculum program are what I'm looking for, because everyone's going to be different. But again, you could research forever and ever, right? And with curriculum and outside classes, there is a point where we have to make a decision. If you're enrolling your children in like some lessons or a co-op or something like that, there's a deadline. So with curriculum, we also have to be like, okay, I need to decide by this date what I'm ordering, what materials I need. And if you're starting out and your kids are really young, you really don't need that much. It's not as complicated. And as they get older, they need more and more. So if you're pulling your child from a brick and mortar situation and they're older in school, you'll have to kind of weigh those choices more heavily. But there's tons out there. I recommend starting with the Catholic option so that you have that as a really good foundation. And then you can make sure to bring in some or all of those if you feel like everything Catholic works for your family. But sometimes everything Catholic doesn't. Kids have special needs. Kids, need different resources. So to look outside that is, kind of the next step. That step's a little scary because it's huge volume of options right now. So when I help mamas find materials, I always just remind them to choose what people have been using for a long time. Choose what's tried and true, what's worked, because you will find that easier as you get started. And certainly you can branch out from there as you get more confident and you get kind of some experience under your own belt. But start with something that has been around, that lots and lots of families have used and loved, and their kids have been successful, ideally like all the way through, right? Because there are foundational skills in elementary school, and there are foundational skills in middle school that need to happen to be successful later on. And so finding a program that's been around the block is super, super helpful if you need to narrow down your choices. But it's a lot of what we do at Heart of a Mother is help moms narrow down their choices too, because there's just so many. But it's also, kind of an overwhelming step. My 2 tips are to just decide, like I said, set a deadline. There's so many good options that you're not going to pick a bad option, really. There's some that are better than others or work better for your kids than others, but something is better than nothing. And the curriculum materials that are best for your family are the ones you are going to use cheerfully and consistently. Mom has to like it and want to do it, or it's not going to get done, or it's going to be really hard to get done. And consistency is really the key. Making sure that you're using the material as it's intended and you're doing it on the schedule that you need to do it on is how you're going to see progress in your kids and how they're going to thrive because they're being appropriately challenged. So whatever it looks like you're like, I could use that. I could do that every day. That's really where you want to lean.
Nice.
So those are my 5 steps as you go through that process. And there's more that you have to do afterwards, right? You want to figure out like your schedule and what your day is going to look like. But getting started, that puts you on a really good path.
Yeah, it seems like it would. And is there anything else, just as you're stepping back from that just launch, anything else that you'd like people to think about or that they need to know?
I think that it's easier than you think it is, moms and dads. It's really, you've been teaching your kids to eat and walk and get dressed. And we think, oh, how do I teach them math? It's not as complicated as you think it is, especially if you have good resources that you can open and you feel comfortable using. So that would be one thing, is just, you can do this. It's not rocket science. Yes, there are harder subjects as they get older. And if it's not something you're familiar with, there's so many great resources to either outsource that or to teach children how to teach themselves, which is a great gift. So I just tell mamas, it's not as hard as you think it is. It requires some diligence and it requires love. The biggest key to why homeschooling works, in my opinion, is because it comes from parents' love. It comes from usually a mother's love for her kids. And there's nothing that can beat that, right? Your love is the key to their success as a human being. So equally so in their academics and in what they're learning. So I think that would be my like, don't forget to say this, is that
Yes.
It's easier. It's easier than you think because you love them and no one else loves them like you do. No one.
Yeah. Amen.
Except God. Except God.
yeah, there you go. And you guys, he's got your back.
Yep.
God's got this. Just briefly, if you had to kind of put your finger on 1 or 2 things that you do differently if you were just starting all over again, Jenny, where would you take us on that?
So I think about this question sometimes, and I don't think I would do too much differently because I really believe that God leads us on this journey and we have to just follow him and we're along for the ride a lot of times, and just do what he leads us to do. I think I would try to do some things better. There were seasons that I did not appropriately challenge some of my kids, and they needed a little bit more of a challenge, but I kind of took the easy road and didn't want to push too much. I think that there were seasons that I would go back and push a little more in a kind, loving way, of course, but I kind of took the easy route. And I think beyond that, it kind of goes together, but just taking their lead more in some areas, and going a little bit more on the interest-led, what interests that child, and maybe capturing that and trying to lean into that rather than, when I really early on, I was, as some will say, too focused on philosophy. Like, this is the philosophy and this is the teaching method, because I was a school teacher, so that was important. But just to really look at my child even more than I did. I think I chose approaches and philosophies and materials that worked for my kids, but I think I could have done better with something that really lit them on fire in certain seasons and certain subject areas. And I would love, and I try to do those things, moving forward. I'm still doing this. I still am trying to challenge them appropriately, but not too much, and really listen to their interests and try to plan our path of learning to include that.
Yeah. I mean, if we're home educating, we're all learning, right? Homeschool mothers say that all the time. They're learning along with their kids. They're learning from their kids. They're learning about their kids. What are your final thoughts to take us out with, Jenny? Where would you like to leave us today?
Well, just to comment on what you just said too, I think there are no homeschooling experts really, because you're the expert in your own child. And that's what makes homeschooling work. In closing, one of the things I alluded to a couple times, besides the importance of praying and keeping God at the center of all things, is that homeschooling is unique as an educational approach. And if we lean into the uniqueness of homeschooling, the flexibility of the schedule, the ability to explore the world, the togetherness as a family, all of those things, if we lean into what makes us different than brick and mortar school classroom learning, we're more successful. And so as we kind of think about getting started homeschooling, or if someone's listening and is continuing homeschooling, is just, lean into what makes homeschooling such a gift, and you'll find greater success that way.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Being the unique and unrepeatable mom, her unique and unrepeatable children, having taken them out of, an education that's very repetitively applied to all children the same way. It makes so much sense. It's like opening the windows and letting in the fresh air. Really appreciate your perspective, Jenny, all your experience and your humility. Thanks for saying what you said about not being experts, because we can't be experts for each other's lives and each other's kids, right? But we thank you so much always, Jenny, for being with us. So appreciate what you're doing out there in the community.
Well, thank you. It's always a joy to be here and share. And it does invigorate me to share about what I love about homeschooling, because then it's more enjoyable for me.
Yeah, I love it. It's always something comes back when we give, right? So everybody find Jenny Bales at heartofamother.net. You can find her community on Facebook too, but go to her website. You'll find all the pathways to where you can find Jenny, and also click the tab that says, Should You Homeschool? She actually has a download there, Should I Homeschool? 5 questions to answer first. So those are different questions than we covered today. We did the getting started today, but these are just if you're still in that place where maybe not this fall, maybe next year. What are some questions to answer first? And again, we thank you for being with us, Jenny, and everyone who's listening. Please pray for us. We're praying for you as well. God bless you. And that's our show for today. Our program is sponsored by homeschoolconnections.com. Be sure to subscribe to Homeschooling Saints and leave us an honest review. God bless you, and thank you for joining us.